So good morning everyone. I feel that you already know me from yesterday, so it's a more relaxed atmosphere. I would like to thank SK again for inviting me over and giving me this chance to tell you my story and the story of John Cabot. Yesterday, during various presentations, I heard that the audience often asked how. You're very interested in how to do things. You know, we all understand the need to become more entrepreneurial, and most of the questions were really focusing on, okay, so how do I roll up my sleeves and actually do this? And I'm going to share with you my experience in doing it at John Cabot. Now, before I do that, I want to give a brief introduction so that you understand who we are as a university. John Cabot is an American university in Italy, which is a bit of an anomaly. We don't have a university in the States. We were born as an institution that would host American students who wanted to study abroad. And this was back in the 70s, so we are 45 years old, which for such an institution is quite old. We're among the first ones in terms of American universities overseas. We're also a very small institution compared to the Italian universities. So Italian universities have about 20 to 30,000 students. We only have, counting everything, about 1,500. This June, the graduating class was less than 190 students, of which about 60 were business marketing, sort of coming from our department. So you can see that the dimension that we have is quite small, which creates some opportunities but also gives us some constraints. John Cabot has gone through many changes in its life. It started off, as I said, as a study abroad program, then gradually became a real university. We are accredited by Middle States, which is an accreditation center in the United States, and we give out American degrees to our students. In the last 10 years, we've repositioned ourselves to provide an excellent American education in Italy. And we have a very diverse student body. We have about a third of the students coming from Italy, not just Rome, all over the country. About a third of the students coming from the United States, and the rest coming from all over the world. We have about 70 to 80 countries represented. So that creates a very international, truly international environment, which means that we discuss international issues all the time, regardless of the class we're in. We might have, for instance, during the Russia-Ukraine conflict, you might find students from Russia and from the Ukraine debating about this conflict and giving a different perspective, very direct perspective to the rest of the class. So this creates a very interesting environment. Our faculty also are very international. We come from all over the place. Most of us have mixed backgrounds, like myself. For instance, I am half Italian, half Argentine, and I studied in England and I studied in the States. So there is this kind of mix that's very typical in our university and very atypical in Italy, where everything is much more homogeneous in the Italian universities. So this should give you a bit of a flash of who we are. The fact that we are small also means that we really all know each other. I know my colleagues from different departments, the different faculties. So I talk to English literature colleagues, to political science colleagues on a daily basis, which makes for a very rich exchange. And it provides a good ground to create unusual programs or unusual collaborations that you might not be able to do if you were in a big faculty of hundreds of faculty members that are all economists or all management experts. So that gives you a bit of a sense for what John Cabot is. And today, what I wanted to share with you is our experience in building an entrepreneurial center. I joined John Cabot on a full-time basis in 2010. I had been collaborating with them before that, but I come to academia from business. I went to business school, I graduated, and for about 20 years, I developed my career in international business with a strong focus on entrepreneurship and technology. My own startup was in telecommunications, and I then assisted many founders in the development of their technology businesses. But when I had the chance to teach at John Cabot, I fell in love with the academic aspect of it and gradually transferred all my activities to it. So fast forward to 2012, and I was the person who talked about entrepreneurship at a time where that word didn't mean much to most of my colleagues. I had, sort of promoting, carrying this flag for some time, proposing courses and really pushing that boundary until finally the administration, thought it might be a good idea to explore that. Had a conversation with our president and our dean, and they said, okay, why don't you create an institute for entrepreneurship? Okay, that sounds interesting. What should I do? Whatever you want. The sky is the limit. The budget is equal to 0 for now, but the sky is the limit in terms of imagination. And so that's how it all started. And obviously when you start something like this, the first question is, what am I going to do? The options are so many. Not having a budget created a good discipline. Yesterday I heard some of the questions were, sort of, how do I start if I don't have money? And although money is important, it's fundamental, it really can create more problems than solutions at the very beginning of a project. Because if I had $100,000 to play with or something like that, I might have gone for the easy solutions, the flashy solutions, the easy wins. And I might not have today the center that I do have, which I think is very solid and really accomplishing its mission. So in finance, we talk about the discipline of scarcity. When you have scarce resources, your imagination and creativity kicks in, and you start finding original solutions. It really is true, and you start finding solutions that are unexpected and that other people hadn't thought about. And so that's what we did. But obviously you don't, especially if you do have scarce resources, you don't simply blindly go into any direction. You have to have some sort of plan. And here I'm going to digress, because often my students ask me, well, should we start with a business plan? Let me start, sort of step back for a moment. How many of you are students? Raise your hands, please. Okay. And professors? Okay, very nicely balanced audience. So my students often ask me, should I start with a business plan? And I'm always torn about the answer to that. My immediate response is not really. The business plan is very, very useful because it forces you to think through all the aspects of the business. But before you get to that, there are many questions that need answers, and they need fast answers. So you need to design a plan that allows you to test your ideas and get that feedback quickly. So what you need in the first place is a sense of direction, more than a real detailed plan. The plan will follow, but that sense of direction is something that will guide you through the many choices that you will have, and that will enable you to use that feedback and recast your thoughts about the project very quickly. So that's where I started, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I started looking for a pedagogical framework. We are a learning institution, so obviously anything I did had to be rooted in a pedagogical framework, so that was the first step. I also was very aware that if you are going to build something that has a soul, you need a mission, you need a strong mission. And since, although I was in entrepreneurial mode, this wasn't an isolated startup, but was something built within a larger institution, that mission obviously had to align with the institutional mission. And that was another very important aspect of it. And then it was about thinking, who are my stakeholders? Who am I doing this for? And interestingly enough, if you were here for Professor Gibson's presentation yesterday, that was also what they did at Michigan University. And there was a selection of who are we doing this for? Is it for students? Is it for entrepreneurs? Is it for alumni, etc.? So that was also an important piece of the puzzle that had to be defined early on. And then, of course, doing an environmental audit. My recipe is not immediately translatable to any context. That's what works in Italy may not work in India, it may be completely different. But I think what I'm going to try to convey to you today is the thought process. And the thought process, I think, does apply to pretty much any context. Then you go through the audit, understanding strengths, weaknesses, objectives, direction, and then you define your own recipe. But again, there is a structure to thinking about it. And I hope to share that with you today in an interesting way. That's my hope. And so I will go through the process with you, and then I'll tell you about what we feel that our achievements are, how we measure success. That's another very important aspect of any project, any startup. How do we define success and how do we measure it? The measurement can be qualitative, but also quantitative. It helps to have a quantitative measurement because then you can analyze progress a long time, and it makes it easier to communicate it. And communicating success is fundamental to then find the resources and to get people on board, get people to share your vision, and to say, great idea, let me help you. So this is sort of the package that you're getting today, and I hope you enjoy the journey with me. So in terms of the pedagogical framework, it's not easy because even in the research and the literature today, there still isn't a very well-defined idea of what is an entrepreneurial education. And so it goes in different directions. It is obviously about courses in entrepreneurship that teach you how to do certain things. But it's also about developing a certain skill set that allows you to be very versatile and do innovative things. It's also about establishing a mindset that allows you to think in a slightly different way. So all of these things combined together, they're not very well defined yet at academic level. However, there have been frameworks developed. I've obviously, being in Italy, referred back to the European Union level because they've done a lot of work in this direction, but there is equivalent research also in the United States. So let me sort of go quickly through the various pieces of the puzzle that I analyzed. And the first one, for me, was the European Union key competencies for lifelong learning. Let me digress for a moment here. I like to talk about the European Union for a moment because I think that can be a point of contact between you and me, in the sense that if you look at the European Union, conceptually it's not very different from India. It's a bunch of countries or areas that got together and decided to give themselves a common regulation. We all have different languages and we communicate with each other in English. Although I must admit that Italians don't speak English as well as you do. But generally speaking, European countries communicate in English. We have different histories, we have different traditions, we have different religions as well. But there is this overall body called the European Union that doesn't always work perfectly. There are conflicts and there are shortcomings, but that brings us all together, creating, in my view, a lot of good value. shared value. So one of the things that the European Union does is look at education and look at what outcomes the educational system in any EU country should have. The competencies here, I'm not sure you can read that, it's very small, I'm afraid, so I'll read it for you. Literacy and languages, and I think we can all relate to that. Maths, science and engineering. Digital competence. Personal, social and learning competence. Civic competence. Entrepreneurship and cultural awareness and expression. And of course the one I'm interested in is entrepreneurship. And this is a relatively recent development that entrepreneurship stands so clearly and so explicitly in this set of competencies that the EU considers fundamental for lifelong learning. Now, we've talked about entrepreneurship in the context of an engineering school, and it's fairly obvious why engineers should have entrepreneurial competencies to transform the product of their intellect into something that can be commercialized and can be viable. But entrepreneurship is really a life skill for anyone. And for instance, at Cabot, where we don't have engineers, we are a liberal arts university, so we have economists, business people, people who graduate in the humanities. We still feel that entrepreneurship is a skill that will enable all of our students to be creative about their careers and their professional goals. 20% of our partner companies in placement are startups. So we are placing a lot of students in a startup context. And they may be English literature graduates, they know how to write. Communication is an essential part of any entrepreneurial venture. They get hired. So there is more to entrepreneurship than simply creating a business. And we'll explore that a bit more in depth later. The other framework I was looking at, which is much older than the EU one, that the 21st century skills done by the World Health Organization in the 1990s, clearly divides these skills. It's not just about the fundamental literacies, knowing how to write, how to speak, how to think critically, how to do maths, etc., but also about how to face complex challenges which bring together a number of different skills, and how to develop character qualities. So, for instance, curiosity, perseverance. Perseverance is fundamental if you're going to do a startup. To all the students at the back, you start a company with a great idea, you think the world is your oyster, and very quickly you will find one problem after another. What you had planned will never turn out the same way. And that requires that perseverance, belief in what you do, the ability to listen to what the market is telling you, and the determination to find a solution to each problem, time after time after time. So, combined, I think this is very important. It's not just about imparting knowledge or information. It's not just about learning one specific thing, but in a broader scope, developing equally the content, the skills, and the qualities, the character qualities that you need to act in a world that's changing very fast and where we cannot rigidly adhere to what we learned even 5 years ago, let alone 20, down the road.